The white transport truck had barely turned onto the quiet service road when all three K-9s lifted their ears at the same time. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't birds. It was 6 motorcycles closing in, too close, too quiet to be coincidence. Up in the cab, the young driver checked her mirror, unaware that in just minutes she would be surrounded, and that the 3 dogs riding behind her were about to change everything. Chambin? The yard woke up slowly with the sun, long stripes of light sliding across concrete and chain link. Trucks sat in patient rows, metal still cool from the night. In the corner by the kennels, 3 pairs of eyes were already awake, watching every shadow. Ranger, Coda, and Blaze could feel it in the air. Today was not just another training day. Ranger lay with his chin on his paws, ears relaxed but ready. The old German shepherd had the calm of a dog who had seen chaos and walked out steady. He watched the gate, timing the familiar footsteps before they appeared. He knew the sound of the girl's boots now, the small hitch in her left step from hours on the clutch. Haley crossed the yard with a to-go cup in one hand and a clipboard in the other, ponytail tucked through the back of a faded ball cap. She looked young, too young to be hauling 3 federal K-9s across the state, but there was a serious line set between her brows. As she passed the kennels, 3 tails thumped almost in unison, soft against metal. Coda was the first to stand, slim Malinois body unfolding in one smooth motion. His nose twitched, catching every trace of gasoline, coffee, and dust clinging to Haley's jeans. To him, she smelled like early mornings and long roads. He pressed his nose to the kennel door, not whining, just breathing her in like a map he trusted. Blaze paced once, twice, then stopped exactly where he knew she would see him. The Dutch shepherd's coat caught the morning light, a mix of dark stripes and quiet fire. He had the sharpest edge of the 3, always reading hands, shoulders, the tilt of a stranger's chin. With Haley, though, he simply leaned his weight against the bars, asking without words, "Are we going?" Deputy Mark limped out of the office, coffee in one hand, brace visible under his duty pants. He gave Haley a nod that carried both authority and something softer, almost paternal. "Morning, kid. Your crew's ready," he said, jerking his chin toward the kennels. The dog's ears pivoted at his voice, but their eyes went right back to her. Ranger watched the exchange, picking up every tone humans didn't hear themselves. He knew Mark as the man who had taken him into burning houses and noisy streets, the steady center in chaos. Now Mark moved slower, smell of old injury in his joints, but his scent around Haley told Ranger one thing clearly. This girl was pack. She mattered. Haley set the clipboard on a crate and stepped up to Ranger's kennel first. She didn't talk much, just slid her fingers through the wire and scratched that spot behind his ear he pretended not to like. His eyes slipped half-closed anyway. "Long haul today, buddy," she murmured. Ranger didn't understand the words, but he understood the promise in her voice. One by one, she checked their vests, their tags, their paws. Coda held still as she tightened his collar, though his muscles hummed with quiet energy. Blaze nudged her elbow with his nose when she lingered, impatient in the way only a working dog waiting for orders can be. Mark watched all of it with a quiet, measuring gaze, as if testing a bridge before driving heavy weight across it. Near the fence, Earl leaned against his old pickup, cup of black coffee cooling in his hand. Retired now, with a gray beard and sun-cut wrinkles, he still came by the yard on mornings when K-9 units shipped out. He knew the rhythm of these days, the look in a young driver's eyes when they thought it was just cargo. Haley didn't have that look. She kept glancing at the dogs like they were passengers, not freight. "Remember," Mark said, stepping closer, voice dropping so only she and the dogs could hear. "They're officers first, dogs second. Folks out there don't always see it that way." Ranger's ears flicked, catching the subtle hardening of his tone. Coda's eyes shifted to the gate as if he could already see folks out there, waiting just beyond the asphalt. Haley nodded, swallowing once. "I'll get them there on time," she replied, but Mark shook his head. "Get them there safe," he corrected. Blaze tilted his head at the extra weight in that word. Safe. He didn't know what was coming, only that each syllable laid itself on his shoulders like a familiar vest. Protection, barrier, line in the sand. When the kennels finally opened and leashes clipped, the yard changed. The air felt more focused, less like morning, and more like mission. Ranger moved to Haley's left without thinking. Coda drifted a step ahead to scout. Blaze slid to her right, close enough for his flank to brush her leg. To anyone watching, it looked like a girl walking 3 dogs to a truck. To the 3 of them, it was formation. As Haley loaded them into the custom K-9 compartment on the back of the transport truck, the metal ramp rang under their paws with a solid, reassuring sound. Ranger took the far corner where he could see most. Coda settled near the side vent for scent. Blaze chose the spot closest to the door. Outside, the sun climbed higher, lighting the yard like any other workday. Inside the steel, 3 hearts beat in quiet sync, ready for a road that none of them knew was about to turn dark. Chocked. The road out of the yard was quiet, washed in a soft morning haze that made everything feel harmless. Haley guided the truck toward the highway, the rumble steady beneath her seat. In the K-9 compartment, Ranger watched each passing shadow through the vent window, his calm settling over. The other 2 like a silent anchor. Nothing threatened them yet, but he tracked the world as if danger could lift its head anywhere. At their feet, Coda shifted his weight and sniffed at the airflow, slipping through the mesh. The Malinois caught every new scent the moment it appeared. Diesel fumes, warm asphalt, a bakery waking up somewhere in town. His ears flicked at each unusual note, but he stayed relaxed, lying long and narrow like a coiled spring, resting only because Ranger was resting. Blaze had no patience for resting. The Dutch shepherd sat closest to the compartment door, chest rising with alert breaths. Every vibration of the truck made him lift his head. Every turn signaled a new calculation. He wasn't tense, just wired for work. Haley's scent still lingered in the air, mixed with leather and coffee, and he listened for her voice even when she was out of sight. By late morning, the truck pulled into a small gas station off the county road. A crooked canopy shaded 2 pumps and a faded sign promising cold drinks, hot food. Haley stepped out, stretching her shoulders before heading in. Ranger rose to his feet, nose following her until she disappeared behind the glass door, then settled again, eyes still open. Inside the store, Haley grabbed water, checked the route on her phone, and paid with quiet politeness. She didn't notice the group of bikers gathering on the far side of the lot, their engines idling low, jackets creaking as they leaned against their bikes. Blaze noticed them first, even before their voices carried across the asphalt. Something in the way they moved, loose but watching, sent a small spark down his spine. Coda lifted his head next, nostrils widening. The sharp scent of gasoline mingled with a sour tang, cheap beer, unwashed metal, something else he didn't like. He rose slowly, tail low but steady, ears angled toward the silhouettes outside. He didn't growl. He didn't need to. Ranger had stood. That alone meant something had shifted. Ranger eased forward until his face reached the vent window. From inside the steel shade, he saw the bikers fully now. 6 men, one taller than the rest, face marked by a long scar that shone pale under the sun. Their attention wasn't casual. They were watching Haley. Ranger's ears tipped forward, then flattened, the quiet dog's version of a warning lantern. Haley stepped out of the store with her drink tucked under her arm. The moment the door closed, the biker's chatter dropped. Blade, the one with the scar, grinned as she passed, tapping the handlebar of his bike as if to show off. She didn't react, just walked steadily to the truck, but she felt their eyes, heavy and sharp as gravel underfoot. Blaze pressed himself closer to the door. He could hear Blade's laugh, a grating sound that lifted the hairs down his back. Ranger shifted to stand behind him, posture calm but immovable. Only Coda kept scanning the lot, nose drifting from biker to biker, as if memorizing each scent for later. As Haley climbed into the driver's seat, she glanced toward the mirrors. The bikers pretended not to notice, but one of them, young, restless, pulled out his phone and tilted it just enough to film. She didn't like the look, but she told herself not to overthink it. She had a schedule to keep, 3 trained partners behind her, and miles to go. Still, as she started the engine, Ranger turned his head toward her voice through the vent and held it there for a long, steady beat. Outside the truck, the bikers mounted their motorcycles one by one, engines flaring like a warning that hadn't been spoken aloud. When Haley rolled back onto the open road, the dogs settled, but none of them relaxed fully. Ranger remained seated, bracing gently as the truck picked up speed. Coda lay down again but kept his ears angled back toward the rear. Blaze watched the doorway, muscles knitting and unknitting with each breath. The world had gone quiet again, but something from that gas station clung to the air like a scent none of them could shake. As the truck merged onto the highway, Haley exhaled slowly, unaware that 3 pairs of eyes behind her were already reading the road with instinct sharper than any mirror. The morning still looked calm. The sky still stretched wide. But inside that steel compartment, the K-9s felt something tightening in the distance, drawing toward them on 2 wheels and heavy engines. They knew long before she did that trouble was coming. The highway opened wide as Haley settled into the long stretch ahead, the truck humming a steady rhythm beneath her. The morning light softened into a warm glow across the hood, and for a few minutes the world felt simple again. In the K-9 compartment, Ranger finally lay down, though his eyes never fully left the narrow vent. Calm didn't erase vigilance for him. Coda rested beside the wall, nose tilted toward the airflow sliding through the mesh. Every shift in wind brought him new information: a distant barbecue pit, firing up, cut grass, engine oil. He sorted those scents the way others read a newspaper, separating routine from unusual. Nothing yet pushed him upright, but something in the air made him breathe deeper. Blaze was the first to pick it up, the faint thrum of motorcycle engines, too consistent to be random. His ears tipped forward, and he stood slowly, weight balanced, tail still. Ranger's head lifted immediately, reading Blaze's posture before the sound reached him. He rose and stepped closer to the vent, watching the horizon unfurl behind them. Haley glanced at her mirror and frowned. The same group of bikers from the gas station trailed far back, small but distinct shapes glinting under the sun. Maybe they were just heading the same direction, she told herself. Highways did that. But the tight formation unsettled her. She reached instinctively toward the radio handset, only to hear static wash through the speaker. Inside the truck. Blaze let out a quiet rumble. Not a warning yet, but the kind of sound that asked the others to pay attention. Coda lifted his head, nostrils flaring. He caught the scent of exhaust again, sharper this time, mixed with the metallic tang he had noticed earlier. He pushed closer to Ranger, who stood perfectly still, studying the road behind them. The bikers closed the distance little by little, not enough to alarm a casual driver, but enough that Haley felt her shoulders tighten. One rider drifted closer to the side of the truck, then slowed, then pulled forward again, as if measuring the blind spots. She tightened her grip on the wheel and adjusted her mirrors twice, hoping she was imagining the pattern. Ranger shifted to brace his front paws against the doorframe, a position he rarely used unless he expected movement. He could sense Haley's unease through the thin metal barrier, the subtle change in her heartbeat rhythm, the way her voice had gone quiet inside the cab. Dogs didn't need to see fear to know it. They tasted it in the air. Coda pressed his nose against the side vent, following the biker's placement with growing intensity. He didn't growl, but the muscles along his shoulders tightened inch by inch. To him, the pattern was clear now. The engines behind them weren't flowing with traffic. They were matching the truck. They were hunting, even if they didn't know it yet. Haley tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself she wasn't alone, even if it felt that way on an open stretch of road with few cars and long gaps between exits. She reached back mentally toward the presence of the dogs, picturing Ranger's calm, Blaze's fire, Coda's sharp instincts. Just thinking of them steadied her. Behind her, Blaze moved again, stepping into the narrow strip of light cast from the vent above. His eyes tracked the biker riding closest on the right. He watched the man's posture, the way he leaned, the shift in his boots. Blaze didn't blink. He didn't breathe fast. He simply waited, like a fuse that hadn't yet been lit. The bikers pulled even closer when the highway narrowed near a construction zone. Fresh cones and reflective arrows forced traffic into a single lane. Haley hated how slow she had to drive now, hated that the motorcycles slipped into the space around her like teeth closing over prey. The radio crackled and died again, offering no comfort. Ranger angled his head, catching the subtle change in Haley's breathing through the cab vent. He gave one quiet huff, a soft exhale meant only for his team. Coda rose fully now, paws planted, ready. Blaze stood stiff as carved stone. The three of them locked onto the moving shadows, sliding along the truck's sides. When the last orange arrow pointed toward a detour, Haley hesitated, but the bikers didn't. They dipped into the right turn without hesitation, engines barking as if they were leading her down the only road available. She looked at the GPS, saw the reroute flash, and felt her pulse jump. She didn't want to follow them, but the main road was blocked. The detour was the only open path. As the truck rolled onto the narrow service road, the sound of motorcycles swelled around her again, louder, more deliberate. In the compartment behind her, 3 dogs stood shoulder to shoulder, reading the world with instincts older than fear. The air tasted different now, charged, narrowing, drawing them toward something none of them could see yet. And for the first time on the trip, even Ranger didn't settle back down. The detour road felt different the moment the truck's tires left the main highway. The smooth hum dropped into a lower, bumpier growl as worn asphalt took over. On either side, trees thinned out and gave way to rusted fences, old signs leaning, fields gone to weeds. In the K-9 compartment, Ranger braced softly, reading the change in vibration like a new sentence on an old page. Coda stepped closer to the vent, drawing in the air as if it were evidence. The breeze here carried a heavier story. Salt from far-off water, oil soaked deep into dirt, the dry metal scent of abandoned machinery. No fresh-cut lawns, no diners, no traffic smell. It was a place built for work, long since walked away from. Blaze moved back and forth in the narrow space, not frantic, just calculating. He could feel the road narrowing, turns becoming sharper, speed dropping. That always meant fewer choices, fewer exits. His ears tracked every small rattle from outside, the clank of loose chain link, a loose sheet of tin tapping in the wind. Nothing moved yet, but the whole area felt like it was holding its breath. Up front, Haley's hands tightened on the wheel as she followed the detour arrows. The GPS screen glowed with a thin blue line cutting through a gray nothing, guiding her toward the riverfront. She stole glances at the mirrors, watching the bikers fan out behind her, one drifting ahead as if leading the way. She didn't like being led anywhere. Ranger could feel tension rising through the floorboards, a kind of hum that had nothing to do with the engine. He shifted to stand in the middle of the compartment, where he could see both the small window toward the cab and the narrow slice of outside world. His body language changed, calm still, but with purpose, as if he'd just heard his name in a crowded room. Coda pressed his nose harder against the mesh vent as the truck rolled past a row of empty warehouses. The scents were older here, rain-soaked rope, river mud, rust, bird droppings. He caught a faint whiff of cigarette smoke from somewhere far off, then the sharper, hotter smell of motorcycles pulling closer. His muscles drew tight, a quiet coil of readiness. The road turned again, guiding them toward a stretch of cracked pavement with faded dock markings. An old crane towered in the distance, frozen mid-reach over a river that moved slow and brown. Haley glanced around, realizing there were no other vehicles in sight now. No businesses open, just locked gates and silent buildings. Her phone screen flashed once, then dropped to no service. Blaze heard the faint buzz of the phone's failed ping through the wall, then the stillness that followed. He couldn't read a signal bar, but he understood separation. No voices on the radio, no distant rumble of city traffic. Only the truck, the river wind, and the growing roar of bikes slipping into positions that boxed them in tighter with every curve. At the edge of the old port district, a small repair shop sat with its door rolled halfway up. Inside, a young mechanic paused with a wrench in his hand, brow furrowing at the sound of engines piling together. He watched the truck and its ring of bikers move past like a storm cloud rolling low. He wiped his hands on a rag and moved toward his phone. Haley slowed as the detour signs thinned, and then disappeared, leaving her on a wide, empty stretch of lot with nothing ahead but stacked containers and the river's gray shine. The bikers followed, spreading out like they owned the concrete. Her heart knocked once, hard against her ribs, and she felt the urge to reach back, to touch the door behind her where the dogs rode. Ranger sensed the change instantly. Her breathing shifted, and with it his roll sharpened. He stepped closer to the vent and stared out at the growing gaps between the riders, the way they were no longer behind them, but beginning to slide alongside. His chest expanded slowly, not from fear, but from a steady acceptance. This place was not safe. Therefore, it was his work. Coda moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. The Malinois caught a new layer of scent now, adrenaline, hot rubber, men who'd spent too long on the road and not enough time under rules. His ears pinned back for a heartbeat, then came forward again. Whatever was waiting, he wanted to meet it awake. Blaze planted himself closest to the compartment door as the truck rolled deeper into the abandoned lot. His paws spread for balance, claws finding tiny scratches in the metal floor. Through the narrow seam at the bottom of the door, he saw light flicker as motorcycles cut in and out of view. The empty yard ahead felt less like a shortcut and more like a corral. When Haley finally eased her foot off the gas, the truck rocked to a slow, reluctant stop. The bikers' engines idled around them, low and predatory. In the quiet that followed, 3 K-9s stood perfectly still in the dim compartment, listening to that silence like a warning bell. Out here, far from the yard and the familiar, they understood the truth first. They had not been led off the main road by accident. Haley sat for one long breath with her hands on the wheel, listening to the engine circle. Then she shut the truck off, and the sudden quiet felt almost louder. Out in the lot, gravel crunched under heavy boots as the bikers dismounted, their voices turning rougher now that there were no other vehicles, no witnesses in sight. In the K-9 compartment, Ranger shifted his stance and anchored himself. He could no longer see the open road, only the hard edge of containers and a slice of pale sky. The silence carried new sounds now, footsteps spreading out, laughter without humor, the hollow clink of something metal bumping against a belt. He marked each sound like a position on a map. Coda moved to the center of the compartment, head high, nostrils flaring. The men's scent thickened as they closed in, sweat, leather, cheap cologne, stale smoke. It mixed with a bitter note he knew too well from past missions, the sharp, restless smell of people who were about to ignore good sense. His tail hung low, not in fear, but in focus. Blaze pressed his shoulder right against the door, feeling every vibration through the steel. He heard one biker slap a palm against the side of the truck, another drag fingers along the metal with a slow scrape. The Dutch shepherd's lips twitched, just enough to show a hint of tooth, though no sound left his throat. He was listening for Haley. She climbed down from the cab, boots landing on concrete that seemed too big and empty around her. The bikers drifted into a loose half-circle, their engines ticking as they cooled. Blade stepped forward first, Scar catching the light, smile too easy to be friendly. "Little far from town for a girl and a couple of stickers, don't you think?" he said. Ranger heard his tone even through the wall, the oily drawl that didn't match the words. Haley's reply came steady but tight. "Just passing through." Detour said this way. There was a pause, then a low chuckle that made Blaze's hackles lift. The dogs couldn't see the grin, but they felt what came with it. Confidence built on making others small. One biker peeled off toward the rear of the truck, his boots dragging just enough to telegraph carelessness. Coda tracked him by sound alone, pivoting his body as the man's scent moved along the side panel. When fingers tapped near the back latch, Coda stepped closer, chest filling with a breath he held like a loaded line. Haley moved to intercept, boots crunching as she cut the man off with her body. "Don't touch that," she said, sharper now. Blade sauntered closer, pretending to smooth things over, hand landing lightly on her arm as if they were old friends. It was a brief touch, but every nerve in Blaze's body reacted as if someone had flipped a switch. The Dutch shepherd let out a low, contained growl that vibrated through the door, joined a heartbeat later by Coda's rumble and a tight, clipped bark from Ranger. The compartment rang with their voices, metal amplifying the warning. Outside, a few of the bikers flinched before they could stop themselves, eyes snapping toward the source. Ranger stepped forward until his nose almost touched the vent, eyes locked on the outline of Blade's boots. His bark had not been wild. It had been precise, the same tone he used when spotting a suspect's weapon. In that narrow space, he could feel Haley's heartbeat running fast, smell adrenaline rising like heat off pavement. It pushed his protective instinct into full clarity. Haley took a half step back, sliding her shoulder against the compartment door. She didn't look over her shoulder, but her voice dropped just enough for the dogs to hear it as something different from what she gave the bikers. "Hold," she said quietly. "Eyes on me." It was a command wrapped in trust, telling them to be ready without crossing the line first. Coda froze at that word, muscles still taut, but controlled. Blaze lowered his head, narrowing his gaze through the hairline gap at the base of the door. Ranger steadied himself, weight evenly distributed, the living boundary between threat and handler. The lot around them seemed to tighten, air heavy with what might happen next, but inside the compartment, order held. For a moment, even the bikers felt that shift, the sense that whatever they had cornered was not as helpless as it looked. Engines clicked softer, a bird called once from the riverbank, and the wind carried the faint hum of distant traffic far beyond the empty yard. The 3 K-9s stood in the dim light, waiting, not for fear to pass, but for the moment when their restraint would matter most. For a moment the lot hung in a strange balance, like a coin spinning on its edge. The bikers shifted their weight, trading looks, deciding how far they wanted to push. Haley stood with her back close to the K-9 compartment, feeling the faint warmth of 3 steady bodies just beyond the steel. Behind her, Ranger's quiet breathing marked the seconds. Blade's smile thinned. Whatever amusement he'd been faking slipped away, leaving something sharper. "Relax," he said, stepping closer, boots scuffing grit. "We're just talking." His hand lifted again, fingers brushing the air near her shoulder. It wasn't a grab, not yet, but every K-9 in the compartment felt the intent leaning forward. Blaze shifted so that his shoulder pressed the door harder, muscles bunching beneath his coat. He watched the shadow of Blade's legs through the crack at the bottom, the way his stance widened, the tilt of his boots. To Blaze, those were not idle moves. Those were the steps of a man claiming space that wasn't his. Off to the side, another biker got tired of circling the cab and headed for the rear latch. Jax trailed a half step behind him, phone still in his hand, recording like it was all a show. The older biker ran his fingers along the handle with a smug little chuckle. "What's she hiding anyway? Just dogs, right?" The metal clicked softly under his touch. Koda's whole body tightened at that sound. He knew the latch, knew what it meant when someone who didn't smell like a handler reached for it. He slid backward until he stood squarely in front of the rear door from the inside, head lowered, ears pinned but eyes bright. His chest rose deep, filling with a breath that had nowhere to go yet. Haley moved fast, boots scraping, as she cut between the man and the latch. "I said don't touch the truck," she snapped, more steel in her voice than she'd shown before. The biker smirked, leaning in just enough to loom. Closer to the river road, a minivan rolled into view, slowing as the driver took in the strange ring of motorcycles around the big white truck. Inside the van, a little boy pressed his hands to the glass. His eyes went wide when he saw the K-9 decals, then the way Haley's shoulders were squared tight. "Mom, are those police dogs?" he whispered. His mother's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as she eased the van to a stop at a distance, instinct telling her not to drive into the middle of whatever this was. Blade's patience snapped. He brushed past Haley's warning as if it were nothing and let his voice drop lower, words picking up a hard edge. "Open it," he said, nodding toward the compartment. "Let's see these big bad police dogs you're so proud of." A biker behind him tugged a heavy chain from around his waist, letting it fall with a metallic smack against his palm. Ranger heard the chain before he saw its shadow, a familiar, ugly sound from training yards and evidence lockers. To him, chains were never neutral. They were tools for control, for harm. He stepped forward until his chest nearly touched the door, body angled to shield the space where he knew Haley stood just inches away on the other side. Haley's heart slammed once against her ribs. She could feel the moment tipping, like a truck cresting a hill. If she let one of them yank that door open, the dogs would be forced to react with no direction, and chaos would follow. She took a slow breath, eyes on Blade, and made a choice that only a handler in the making would dare. Her voice dropped to that tone the dogs knew was only for them, the one she never wasted. "Ranger, front. Koda, left. Blaze, stay close." The names slid under the steel like light through cracks. Inside, all three K-9s moved at once, as if drawn along the same wire. Positions shifted, paws found balance, muscle lined up behind intent. Haley's fingers closed around the latch. Blade's hand twitched, thinking he'd won, that she was giving in. The chain clinked again as its owner stepped closer, ready to swing at whatever came out. Jax lifted his phone higher, the tiny red light in the corner catching a tremor in his own hand. The lot went very still. The latch snapped, and Haley yanked the door wide. Ranger burst out first, not in a wild leap, but in a controlled, powerful stride that put his body directly between her and Blade. Koda flowed to the left, cutting off the angle toward the minivan. Blaze stepped down last, so close to Haley's leg that his flank brushed her jeans. Eyes locked on the man with the chain. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. The dogs stood low and ready, ears forward, teeth just barely visible behind pulled lips. They didn't bark yet. They didn't lunge. They simply claimed the ground, 3 points of a living shield. The boy in the minivan let out a tiny gasp. Even Blade's mouth slackened just a fraction. Then the chain biker, trying to prove he wasn't afraid, swung the length of metal forward in a clumsy arc. Ranger exploded into a single, perfectly timed movement. No bite, no snap, just a brutal shoulder hit to the man's thigh. The impact knocked the biker off balance, chain slipping from his grip and clattering onto the concrete like a dropped threat. Blaze surged forward half a step, growl ripping out of him now, chest vibrating with power he still held in check. Coda adjusted in an instant, shifting his stance to keep himself between the falling man and the family's van. Ranger planted his paws and stood over the dropped chain, head low, eyes hot and steady. The message was clear without a single tooth-breaking skin. Across the lot, the mechanic from the small shop had stepped outside, phone already at his ear, eyes wide. Earl's old truck had appeared at the far edge of the road, slowing as he took in the scene, the ring of bikes, the girl, and the 3 K-9s drawn in tight around her. He didn't need to hear words to know what he was seeing. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel as siren memories from his past stirred. In the center of it all, Haley exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her free hand hovered just inches from Ranger's back, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her there. The yard, the training days, Mark's steady warnings, all of it narrowed into this moment. The dogs hadn't failed her. They hadn't failed themselves. The fight hadn't happened yet, but the line had been drawn, clear and bright on cracked concrete. For a moment after the chain hit the ground, the lot felt strangely quiet. The bikers stood frozen, caught between anger and the first cold edge of fear. Ranger held his ground over the dropped metal, chest rising slow, eyes locked on the man who'd swung it. Coda and Blaze flanked him, forming a wall that didn't move unless Haley said so. Off in the distance, a new sound slipped into the silence. A faint rising whine carried on the river breeze. Ranger's ears turned before anyone else seemed to notice, one ear toward the threat in front of him, the other toward the approaching sirens. To him, it sounded like backup. To the bikers, it landed like a warning they hadn't expected. The mechanic by the shop stepped farther into the open, phone still at his ear, watching the scene with wide, disbelieving eyes. Earl's old truck idled near the road, his gaze fixed on the 3 K-9s holding formation around the girl. In the minivan, the boy's mother reached for her own phone, her voice low but urgent as she spoke to the dispatcher. Blaze glanced toward the flashing lights as the first patrol car turned into the lot, then snapped his attention back to the nearest biker, reading every twitch in the man's hands. Coda shifted just enough to widen his angle of view, keeping both the van and the officers in his line. Ranger didn't move at all. He was the hinge the whole moment hung on. When the cruisers rolled to a halt, doors opened in practiced rhythm. Officers stepped out with their hands near their holsters, eyes flicking between the ring of bikes, the girl, and the 3 dogs standing like trained sentries. One of the younger officers actually stopped mid-stride, the word K-9s, slipping out under his breath, half awe, half relief. Blade tried to find his swagger again as the officers approached. "She set them on us," he shouted, jabbing a finger in Haley's direction. "We were just talking, and she turned her dogs loose." His voice shook more than he meant it to. The chain biker clutched his leg like he'd been torn open, though no tooth had touched him. Ranger didn't understand the words, but he caught the lie in the pitch, the way the man smelled of fear, not pain. He flicked a glance back at Haley, reading her stillness. She didn't rush to defend herself. She didn't shout. She just kept a steady hand hovering near his back and said, quiet but clear, "Check their phones. Check the cameras. Ask the folks who watched." One of the senior officers, gray at the temples and slow to speak, took that in. His gaze dropped to the chain on the ground, then to the scuff marks where Ranger had hit, then to the exact distance between each dog and each biker. No loose lunges, no erratic behavior, just controlled pressure. His eyes narrowed, not at Haley, but at the men shifting under his stare. The officer turned to Jax, whose phone still trembled in his grip. "You recording?" he asked. Jax hesitated, then nodded. Under the weight of 3 steady canine stares and half a dozen human ones, he handed the phone over. On the small screen, the story played back. Bikes circling the truck, hands grabbing Haley's arm, the chain raised first, dogs still inside, until the very last second. Coda watched the officer's face as he reviewed the footage, the way his jaw tightened at certain frames, the way his eyes softened at others. Dogs couldn't follow video, but they understood expression. Coda's tail gave one small, controlled twitch when he saw the man's gaze flick toward Haley with something like respect. Truth to him always had a scent. This was it. Other angles came in quickly. The mechanic's video from the shop door, the shaky clip from the minivan, the grainy security feed the riverfront camera had caught. Every piece told the same story. The bikers closing in. The girl standing her ground. 3 K-9s holding the line with a restraint that human tempers rarely managed. The officers didn't need narration. The pictures were enough. Ranger eased his posture only when the senior officer finally looked at Blade and said, voice flat, "You sure you want to keep lying?" The leader's shoulders sagged a fraction, bravado leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Behind him, the younger bikers shifted, eyes dropping away from the dog's unblinking gaze. Whatever game they thought they were playing had ended. One by one, officers moved in, cuffing wrists, reading rights. Each time a biker twitched too fast, Blaze's head turned in perfect sync, a silent reminder to keep it neat. Coda adjusted to cover angles as bodies were moved, making sure no one slipped toward the van or the open road. Ranger stayed front and center until the last set of cuffs clicked shut. Only then did he let his chest sink slightly, the first hint that the worst of the work might be over. As the patrol car's doors closed on the men who'd tried to corner them, the lot grew quieter again. The mechanic lowered his phone. The minivan eased forward, the boy inside giving the dogs a small, shaky wave through the glass. Haley finally let her hand rest, just for a moment, on the thick fur at Ranger's neck. The sirens weren't screaming anymore. They were just background now, fading into distance, while 3 K-9s stood in the soft aftershock of danger, knowing they had held the line exactly the way they were trained to do. The lot finally settled after the last patrol car rolled away, leaving tire tracks and quiet behind. The river moved slow at the edge of the concrete, carrying the day forward whether anyone was ready or not. Haley stood for a moment in the middle of the empty space, 3 K-9s still positioned around her like the fight wasn't entirely finished. Ranger was the first to ease. His ears relaxed a notch, and his stance shifted from ready to hit to ready if needed. He turned his head just enough to look up at Haley, checking her the same way he checked a cleared hallway. No blood, no broken movement. Her breathing still quick, but steady. His tail brushed once against her leg, a quiet roll call. "You're here, I'm here." Coda sat down slowly, as if stepping back from an invisible line. His eyes scanned the lot one more time, the shop, the road, the now empty spots where bikes had stood. The scents of fear and metal were already fading, thinned by river air and exhaust from the patrol cars. He drew in a long breath, then let it go, accepting that for now the threat had passed. Blaze stayed standing a little longer, muscles humming with leftover electricity. His gaze followed the last flicker of red and blue lights as they disappeared around the bend. Only when they were gone did he turn to lean gently against Haley's thigh. It wasn't a search for comfort. It was a statement. He'd take that spot next to her again, any time the world turned mean. The senior officer walked back over, hat in his hand. Steps, unhurried now that the adrenaline had cooled. He looked at the dogs first, not the girl, their steady posture, their clear eyes, the way they held themselves like they were still on duty. "Those aren't regular K-9s," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone, before meeting Haley's gaze. "And you're not just a driver?" Haley brushed a hand over Ranger's neck, fingers shaking a little now that everything was over. "I just did what I had to do," she answered, voice soft. The officer gave a small snort, the kind that comes from years of watching people either fall apart or step up. "No," he said. "You did a handler's job. They listened because they know who you are to them." Ranger leaned into her touch, eyes half closed as the officer's words washed over them both. He didn't understand rank or job titles, but he understood tone. Approval had a warmth to it, like sunlight after rain. Coda's ears flicked at the sound, and Blaze's tail made a small, proud sweep against her boot, as if the praise were being pinned to all four of them at once. Later, back on the road, the truck felt different. The engine's rumble was the same, the route back to the yard unchanged, but the silence carried new weight. In the compartment, Ranger stretched out where he could see the vent and the cab window both. Coda dozed with one ear up, every bump still logged. Blaze finally lay down, pressed to the door, guarding the memory of the lot as much as the girl driving. By the time they rolled through the yard gate, the sun had dipped low, painting the concrete in long, tired shadows. Mark limped out of the office when he heard the familiar engine, Earl close behind him. They expected a routine return, a truck, 3 dogs, a tired driver. What they saw in Haley's face and the K-9's posture told a different story before she said a word. Ranger stepped down first when she opened the compartment, landing with the solid certainty of a dog who had earned his rest. Coda followed, head high, eyes bright but calm. Blaze hopped down last, then immediately circled back to stand between Haley and the open yard, as if danger might have snuck home with them. Mark watched the formation and felt the hair rise on his arms. Inside the break room, the small TV in the corner chattered with the evening news. A grainy clip flashed across the screen, a wide shot of a truck surrounded by bikes, then zoomed footage of 3 K-9s stepping out in perfect formation. A caption crawled underneath. "Young truck driver and police dogs face down biker gang without a single bite." The volume didn't need to be high. Everyone knew those silhouettes. Haley stood in the doorway, Ranger at her side, Coda and Blaze flanking her like they always had, even before the lot by the river. Mark looked from the screen to the real scene in front of him, then shook his head slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Told you they weren't just cargo," Earl muttered, raising his coffee like a toast toward the 3 dogs. That night, when the yard finally emptied and the TV went dark, Haley walked one last slow circle past the kennels. Ranger met her at the gate with a soft chuff. Coda pressed his forehead briefly to her hand, and Blaze gave that small, relieved sigh he saved for the moments when danger had turned back into quiet. They were tired, but not broken. Used, but not used up. As she headed for her truck one last time, Haley glanced back at the 3 sets of eyes watching her from behind the mesh. People might say she drove alone, just a young woman behind a wheel on long, lonely roads. The truth was written in those eyes, in the way those dogs shifted whenever she moved. She didn't just haul K-9s from place to place. She traveled with a family that ran on loyalty instead of fuel. Out on the highway again, far from the riverfront lot and its ghosts, the night sky stretched wide over the cab. In the compartment behind her, 3 steady heartbeats found the rhythm of the road like they always did, ready for whatever the next mile brought. Heroes didn't always wear badges where folks could see them. Sometimes they rode in the dark, paws folded, waiting for the next time someone thought she was alone. Kya? If you made it all the way to the end, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. Anything, so I know you were here with us for this journey. And if stories like this touch you the way they touch us, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There are many more real, quiet, powerful K-9 stories coming, and I'd be honored to share the next one with you.